Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines.
More Republicans cross the president on war powers. Welcome to the Thursday edition as a Senate vote on limiting President Trump's authority in Venezuela passes with the help of 5 Republicans. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Tyler Kendall in Washington. Thank you for being with us on Balance of Power. This sets up, Tyler, a final vote for next week on war powers. And it comes just a couple of hours before the next round here. We're watching closely to see how many Republicans might vote to extend Obamacare subsidies.
Right. These are 2 places where Republicans could be going against President Trump. Moments ago, we got President Trump's reaction to this procedural vote when it comes to war powers, naming the 5 Republicans that crossed the aisle by name. That's Lisa Murkowski, Suzan Collins, Rand Paul, and then 2 kind of surprise ones, Joe. Josh Hawley and Todd Young of Indiana.
That's right. We'll see now after 9 Republicans voted for the procedural vote. There you see the 5 from war powers on health care. That number could be even bigger today. And this is going to be a final vote in the House that sets us up around just after the bell. 4:30 is what we think for the vote there. And the president might not be happy about the results on that one either.
But then both of these have this common theme, Joe, that are they really going to actually pass out of the entire Congress and make their way to the White House and to President Trump's desk?
Much bigger questions there, which, of course, then war powers, he would likely veto that anyway. We're going to get an update from Mike Dorning from our Capitol Influence team. And Tyler, looking forward to talking with the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Jason Smith will be with us in just a few moments.
Yep, he could make some news, including on President Trump's ask to boost defense spending, which was just one of the many things that happened this week in Washington that was moving the market. So for the latest look, we're going to head over to Charlie Pellet at World Headquarters in New York to see what he's watching today. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Tyler and Joe Mathieu. Right now, looking at a headline out of Washington and the New York Times. Trump knows he's not telling. New York Times says President Trump has made up his mind on his Fed chair pick. Says, though, he has not talked about that pick with anybody. Again, this is reporting from the New York Times. Those headlines appearing right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service. Watching U.S. markets, looking at the S&P 500 index ticking higher. We're off session highs as you run the GIP screen on the Bloomberg for the S&P. Right now up 69.27 where we stand. That is a gain of 0.1%. Dow Industrial is up 336, up by about 0.7%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 103, drop there of just about 0.4%. On a down day for the NASDAQ Composite Index and the NASDAQ 100 Index, the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares surging now by 1.3%. Among some of those tech names, we are looking at NVIDIA and Apple, both trading lower. That explains part of the reason why the Mag 7 Index is down 0.1%. The 10-year, 4.17%, but the 2-year right now, 3.48%. Gold up $5.50 the ounce, up 0.1%. Big retreat for silver, down 2.8% now, 76.03 on silver. West Texas Intermediate crude up by about 2.3%, 57.29 on WTI. Bitcoin up 0.3%, 91,290. Cannot ignore the move today in defense stocks. Those stocks rallying as President Trump signals plans to ramp up military spending. Case in point, Lockheed Martin up 4.5%, Northrop Grumman up 3.3%, and Kratos, it is up by about 15%. So again, recapping, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all higher, and again repeating the New York Times headline, President Trump says he has made up his mind on his Fed chair pick, but he's not telling anybody. Balance of Power continues right now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Mathieu and Tyler Kendall.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thanks so much. As Charlie mentioned, I'm Tyler Kendall here in Washington alongside Joe Mathieu, and we are counting down to a critical vote in the House on a potential so-called clean 3-year extension of the expiring Affordable Care Act premium subsidies. In fact, Joe Mathieu is going to be headed to the Hill later tonight, 5 p.m. Eastern, for the late edition of Balance of Power, where we'll have all of the coverage. The thing is that there's big questions if this does pass, what ends up happening in the Senate, since lawmakers in that chamber already rejected a very similar piece of legislation. But if you listen to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier today, he says lawmakers are putting together some sort of plan.
Democrats are going to make health care and other high costs, the high cost of living, the number one issue for all of 2026. The average American family There are millions of them discussing this right now. How are we going to pay the bills? And every day Americans are saying to their elected officials, do something about it.
Well, they're going to have a chance to do something a little bit later on today. But as Tyler mentioned, this is a House effort right now. And, well, there are some pieces of legislation in the Senate, but they haven't gathered any momentum yet. What happens today could change that. And that's where we start ahead of our conversation with Congressman Jason Smith. Mike Dorning is with us from our Capitol Influence team at Bloomberg. And it's good to see you, Mike. You've been through a few rounds on Capitol Hill, and I'm wondering what you're thinking about this now, especially when you put these two together. The War Powers vote that drew 5 Republicans to a yes in the Senate will likely be followed by this health care vote in the House that brought 9 Republicans to yes in a procedural vote yesterday. Has Donald Trump found the line on some of these issues on the Hill?
Well, these are two different issues, but potentially very problematic. The health care issue is the one that scares the people who are going to be up for election next year the most, because we've seen constantly people are concerned about the cost of living. These health care spikes are going to be doubling premiums for people who are on the Affordable Care Act. And this is a signal that the Republicans are worried about these surge in health care premiums. Nowadays, actually, Republican areas are more dependent on Obamacare policies than Democratic areas. And that's because the Republican Party's changed. It's more working class. So that's a leading indicator of an election worry. The Venezuela thing is separate. That's people are worried about a quagmire. Remember, a lot of the support for Trump was partly Republicans who were upset, that felt like Bush misled them on Iraq, and they went into that, and that became a quagmire. Now Republicans in Congress, when they hear Trump saying we'll run Venezuela, we have to be open to boots on the ground, they're thinking, no, we're not open to that. And it's amazing to see this level of opposition before there's been a single American killed in combat.
So let's go maybe backwards in order. Healthcare, I have a question on first. When it comes to this plan in the House, not expected to pass the Senate, what does movement look like right now on a potential Senate deal? Because it seems like they could be coalescing around something that might get enough support to then kick back down to the lower chamber.
Yeah, they're sort of wrestling with a couple of different issues, something about how abortion is handled in this, and Republican wishes to move the system more towards something called a health savings account, which is essentially less an insurance policy and more just a tax-protected pot of money that you can use to spend on health care. And it's just balancing. The Democrats don't want to do either of those two things. The Republicans do want to do both of those things, and they're kind of back and forth on it. They haven't gotten there yet, but they're kind of circling around a possible deal. This vote in the House will probably put a little bit more political pressure on the Republicans in the Senate to try to come up with something.
As you like to say, Mike, you've been flipping a lot of burgers today, and one of the other ones is actually funding the government. And before we talk to the chairman, I'm wondering your thoughts on this, because while we talk about some of these more controversial items, very quietly, there's been something maybe resembling or at least closer to regular order happening on Capitol Hill in a way that might help us avoid a government shutdown without, a year-long CR or whatever the other option might be. How close are we to getting a budget?
There's definitely a wish not to have a year-long CR, but there's some complications, and they're kind of technical, like conservatives not wanting to do earmarks and various other things. But the important thing to look at, if you're bottom lining this, is the Democrats don't want to do another shutdown, the Republicans don't want to do another shutdown, and Trump doesn't want to do another shutdown.
That's a good combination.
So they're all trying to find a way to avoid a shutdown. So the risk of a shutdown at the end of the month is low because everyone wants to figure out a way to avoid it. Whether we'll actually be able to get budgets passed and appropriations bills, they're kind of hitting a lot of bumps on the road there. But it's looking like they're going to try to find some way of avoiding it.
All right. We keep hearing cautious optimism.
Yeah,
Joe, we're going to have to wait till the end of the month to see. All right. Probably one of the busiest people in our bureau today, Mike Dorning, who helps run our capital influence team. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to extend the conversation now, bring in one of the lawmakers that will have a say in all of this. That's Congressman Jason Smith, a Republican representing Missouri's 8th District and chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. He joins us now from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thanks for being here. Let's start with this vote that's happening in your chamber later today. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming that you're going to vote against it based off of the procedural vote we saw yesterday. Let me know on that. And if so, do you have any appetite for an extension down the road if we do get something different from the upper chamber, maybe a shorter extension with some structural changes?
What we have an appetite for is to lower the cost of health care for all Americans. That's 347 million Americans. Unfortunately, what is on the floor today only addresses 7% of the population. And what's quite unfortunate, that 7% is part of the Obamacare exchanges that is just littered with so much waste, fraud, and abuse. The Government Accountability Office just came out with a report a couple weeks ago that cited 59,000 dead people the insurance companies were being subsidized for. One Social Security number was tied to 125 plus different policies. We need to make sure we fix the system, get out the waste, fraud, and abuse. We saw what's going on in Minnesota with fraud. We need to do that, and just extending current status quo is unacceptable to the taxpayers.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's good to see you and welcome back. I wonder in that case if you might warm up to the idea of what's in this Senate bill. The Bernie Moreno bill would cap eligibility at 700% of the federal poverty level and require a minimum premium payment. Is that closer to what you're looking for?
It's definitely a step in the right direction, but what we have to understand is as of January 1st of this year, those extended COVID-era subsidies expired. The Democrats created them in the American Rescue Plan, and they made them temporary. They extended them in the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're the ones who set the date for December 31st of this year. When you look at that, in those subsidies, they allowed an unlimited amount of income to be subsidized. So like a husband and wife making $600,000 a year is subsidized. It now reverts to 400% of federal poverty level. So anyone below 400% federal poverty level will have substantial subsidies.
Is this vote happening today a reflection on Republican leadership in your chamber? Because, Congressman, the only reason why it's happening is because some of your colleagues crossed the aisle to force that discharge petition.
This vote's happening because Republicans are standing for all Americans to make sure that we lower health care costs for all Americans. All that the Democrats have been holding out for is just 7% of the population, 24 million people that's on the exchanges. But let's talk about those 24 million people on the exchanges. Last year alone, 12 million people on those exchanges didn't file one medical claim, not even a prescription. You cannot tell me those people did not have health care expenses. They just simply didn't know that they were automatically enrolled. But guess what? Those insurance companies, they were all being subsidized.
Well, last time we had you here, Mr. Chairman, we talked about the possibility of a government shutdown, or on the other side of that coin, maybe an actual budget by the end of this month. I know at one point you were in favor of just clearing the decks, as you told us, and doing a year-long CR. That was ahead of what became the longest government shutdown in American history. Now that we're seeing minibuses start to move, I'm wondering where your level of optimism lies and whether these votes have something to do with it. If the health care vote in the House doesn't pass the Senate and vice versa, are we at greater risk of shutting down?
We have 3 of the 12 appropriations bills signed into law. We have 9 more to do. 3 more will be attempted this week. I believe that those will pass, go to the Senate, and get the job done. We're not. I hope that all of my colleagues have learned that a government shutdown is not the answer, and that we're going to come together. And it appears so far from every indicator that I've seen that no one wants a government shutdown. They want to work together. They want to fund government. And I think that we'll get the job done.
Well, sticking with the budget, President Trump is calling for a record $1.5 trillion defense budget. In a post yesterday, he wants to see this massive $500 billion increase. Are Republicans ready to get behind that?
So I don't know exactly what you're talking about. It's not something that I have seen. But what Republicans are focused on is getting our fiscal house in order. I can tell you, and so is the president, if you just look at last year alone, out of 12 months, 3 of the 12 months, for the first time in decades, did we have more revenues coming into the country than we had expenditures. In the months of April, June, and September. That hadn't happened in decades, so that's a step in the right direction, but we need it for 12 months, not just 3.
Well, we'll show you the post, Congressman, yesterday, this coming from President Trump, saying in part, quote, after long and difficult negotiations with senators, congressmen, secretaries, and other political representatives, I have determined that for the good of our country, especially in these very troubled and dangerous times, our military budget for the year 2027 should not be $1 trillion, but rather $1.5 trillion. Does seeing this post now change any of what we just heard from you in terms of your answer and the viability for this?
One of the most important responsibilities of the federal government is national security, and that's making sure that our citizens are safe. And that is a huge focus of this administration. Unfortunately, the prior administration, they were out to lunch when it came to protecting the homeland. That's why, under President Trump's leadership, we have record lows in violent crime in the United States, actually the lowest in 5 years, and just all across the board, record lows. So the president is all about law and order. He's investing in law and order, and that should be a priority for Congress, and it's a priority of the American people.
No, we wanted to ask you about that because, my gosh, a $1.5 trillion budget would have to probably have to be managed by raising some revenues or cutting a significant amount of spending. But, Mr. Chairman, we've only got a couple minutes left, and I'd like to ask you about what appears to be a looming decision by the Supreme Court on tariffs. This could come tomorrow. We know it's a decision day. It might involve other decisions as well. But at some point, the court's going to have to rule in the near term on this. And I'm wondering if they do strike it down, as tariffs are the purview of the Congress, will there be legislation to back up the president to do what he's trying to do through legislative form? Has that bill been written?
There is no question that whatever the decision is from this upcoming Supreme Court are going to have huge consequences, and Congress will have to act appropriately. It's why that is the first and only time that I've ever sat before the oral arguments, and I did during that case a few months back. And I think it rests within just a couple different justices. Actually, 2 would be my guess, and I'm hopeful that they'll make the right decision. I believe the president has the authority to do what he's been doing clearly under IEPA, and let's see if the courts will decide on that. If the courts rule the other way, Congress will act appropriately. Okay, there you have it from Jason Smith, Chairman of House Ways and Means. Congressman, thank you. It's good to have you back, as always, on Bloomberg TV and radio. That's a tape that we might be playing back at some point, Tyler, and it could be as soon as 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Well, and it's also really interesting if we look at how the administration has talked about using tariff revenue and how that could impact some of President Trump's ideas for the future, like a tariff revenue rebate check. I mean, you mentioned it in this post on military spending. The president said that some of that could come from tariff revenue. That's true, and if you're adding $500 billion to the defense budget, that might require some work at Ways and Means, which is why we wanted to get to that with Jason Smith. So we thank the chairman, and we'll bring it to the panel next. A lot to talk about with our political panel here on the Thursday edition, remembering that healthcare vote is a little more than 3 hours away. This is Bloomberg. The thing is, there's a lot of conversation about what would then have to happen for a plan to get through the Senate. And yesterday on Balance of Power, we had the chance to speak to one of the key bipartisan negotiators, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, who had this to say about how those talks are going.
What I hope is that the House is going to give a strong vote on those extension of the premium tax credits. That will send the bill over to the Senate. A bipartisan group has been working on trying to come up with a compromise on addressing the extension of the premium tax credits. I think we've made a lot of progress. Hopefully we'll get that House bill and have a vehicle that we can then pass out of the Senate and send it back to the House. And I hope the president will finally get engaged on this issue in a way that will allow us to make progress and get this done.
That House bill, of course, drew 9 Republicans in a procedural vote yesterday, which might give us a little bit of a sense of how many Republicans could weigh in the actual floor vote that's set for about 3 hours from now, a little bit more than that. It's where we start with our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor and Democratic strategist Adam Hodge is with us, managing partner at Pulpit International, alongside Republican strategist Matt Terrill, managing partner at Firehouse Strategies. Gentlemen, it's great to have both of you with us. Adam, tell me how this is going to work and how many Republicans you're going to need to convince John Thune that this is real.
Oh, Joe, that's some spooky math. I think you're probably going to get more than the 9 that you got. I think you probably need upwards of 20 to really give the Senate a little bit more momentum, is my sort of back of the envelope math. I think this is a clean extension for 3 years that the House is considering. There's been other proposals that have been put on the table. It's a far cry from what the Senate is considering. And so I think the question when you talk about ping-ponging this back across Capitol Hill is, whatever the Senate does, do you lose Democrats on the other side who are not going to be thrilled with some of the requirements that you're asked, that Bernie Moreno and part of the people on his bill are asking for? So that's where the sausage will be made, and I think it's hard to see. But I think at the end of the day, you got a couple million Americans who are looking at higher prices for healthcare this year, or who are making tough decisions about whether to keep their insurance or just go without it. And all of that boomerangs back to higher costs ultimately for all of us, which is why the Affordable Care Act was trying to put in place in the first place.
Well, let's pick up on this ping pong that Adam is detailing here, Matt. One of the sticking points in the Senate is language around the Hyde Amendment. President Trump said earlier this week that Republicans may have to be flexible when it comes to this. Is this something that could stall efforts to get a health care bill out of that chamber?
Well, look, I think I was going to see the House take their action today. I think you're going to see challenges in the Senate here. Really, the reason why is that Americans nationwide are against Obamacare. Obviously, they've seen it skyrocket their premiums. They've seen it in their view as something that has had fraud, waste in it. But the mega base and the Republican base has been against Obamacare, and many of them have been against extending these Obamacare subsidies. That's the challenge here. And what I think Republicans on Capitol Hill recognize is that their mega base, that Republican base, is going to be vital for the upcoming midterm elections. They don't want to see these subsidies extended. And that's why I think you've seen President Trump out there in the past talking about the need to go directly to consumers. So we'll see what happens on Capitol Hill here. I think the real thing to watch is President Trump. What is he going to do here? And ultimately, Republicans on Capitol Hill, keeping in mind where the base is at. You can't just win the upcoming midterm elections with independent, undecided voters. You have to have an energized base. The base has been against Obamacare since 2010. It's one of the reasons why Republicans took control of Congress in 2010 and won the midterms in 2010. Obamacare is something that's been top of mind for Republican-based voters for years. They don't want it. They want to see a change. We'll see what happens here.
The base, of course, one thing, but to suggest that Americans in general oppose Obamacare, there's a Gallup number from December 2025. This is 1 month to the day old. Independents driving approval of the ACA to a new high in that poll of 57%. Adam, is it the independents that are bringing Democrats and Republicans to the table on this?
They are, but look, I don't just trust Gallup. Trust Trump's pollster, Fabrizio, who's pretty one of the better pollsters out there, who over the summer told Republicans, look, the political math is telling us one thing: do this, get it over with, take the credit, and move on, because it's in your political interest to actually get something done here. And I've said this before in this show: the political smart thing to do would be just to take the credit for giving people cheaper health care. Matt's right. The politics within the caucus make that very difficult. But politically, there's one clear answer here: is just to do it, move on, and then start talking about other things on your agenda. They don't seem to be taking that advice from the president's own pollster.
As we're talking, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has started briefing in the White House press room. We're going to monitor that, bring you updates as they come. And as we wait for the White House's reaction on this vote that is teeing up in the House, Adam, I'm wondering how you're thinking about margins here, tight margins here now for Republicans this week, a 2-vote margin, and how the healthcare conversation is potentially going to play into the conversation we've been having about the deadline at the end of this month on government funding.
Yeah, obviously it's something you're seeing take place here. You're seeing many of these Republicans, frankly, who are in the House voting in favor of extending these subsidies are in very tight races. Mm-hmm. And so that is an equation here. But not to be repetitive on the point, it's going to be difficult for Republicans to win the midterm elections if President Trump doesn't put himself on the ballot. Mm-hmm. And look, President Trump has an ability to energize voters, the Republican base, have crossover appeal. You go back to 2024, President Trump won over many of those independent, undecided voters or traditional Democrat voters. He's got to put himself on the ballot, but his policies will be on the ballot as well. And healthcare is top of mind among Americans nationwide. They've seen premiums go up. They've seen healthcare be a major cost for them. But I go back to the base does not like Obamacare. And that is something that's very real here. And I don't think it's being talked about enough, frankly. And so I do think the question is going to be, where do you go after this vote out of the House? I don't see the Senate passing this through clean. I think you're going to have a situation here where President Trump's going to step in and say, here's what I want. Okay. And at the end of the day, this is the Trump party. At the end of the day, we'll see that I think by and large Republicans rally behind him on it.
And based on recent history, that would be pretty smart analysis when it comes to the president. We should note that, by the way, J.D. Vance just walked into the briefing room, which is something that we don't see too often at the White House. James, let us know if he starts making some news, because we'll bring you in there to hear what he has to say. Matt, did you see what the president put on Truth Social after that vote on war powers? Republicans should be ashamed of the senators that just voted with Democrats in attempting to take away our powers to fight and defend the U.S. He mentions them all: Collins, Murkowski, Paul, Hawley, and Young. Is he right? Should Republicans be ashamed? And what happens to these 5 who now have their names in lights?
Well, look, lawmakers have to make their own choices and how they feel about this, but President Trump is clear about how he feels about it, and he believes that he has the full authority to do what he has done on Venezuela, on foreign policy in general. And I do think that the item that supports the president right now, or at least helps him in his narrative on this, is history. You look back and look at President Bush Sr., who did similar actions, many would argue, as it relates to Panama. You look at the strikes that have been conducted over the past few weeks by U.S. military against Venezuela drug cartels, their boats. President Obama conducted strikes when he was president. In fact, he did a strike against an American citizen. So, look, the bottom line here is that narrative, I think, will help President Trump here. Ultimately, it's what the American people think. And what you've seen is actually on the heels of what's taking shape of capturing Maduro, that the president's approval rating on this issue of Venezuela has gone up. And so that, I think, is an advantage for the administration. We'll see what happens on Capitol Hill, but the president, many would argue, has the authority to do what he has done. And finally, I would just say, I think it was wise for the administration during the press conference over the weekend, on the heels of the Maduro capture, to lean into the fact that this has really been a law enforcement campaign, that Maduro was not the legitimate president of Venezuela, that he was a fugitive, and that this has been a law enforcement campaign with the support of military. I think that narrative has been wise on behalf of the administration. We'll see what happens next.
Well, Adam, to Matt's point, is this a winning point for Republicans, since we saw many of them rally behind what happened when it came to Nicolas Maduro, versus the questions about what could potentially happen next? Because Democrats have really had to thread the needle on being careful with their messaging on this one.
I think this is the high watermark for the president. It's striking to me that 5 days after this assault, you've already lost 5 Republicans on this issue. And it was said earlier in the hour, and there hasn't been a single American boot who's been lost in Venezuela. You're talking about putting troops on the ground to protect the oil companies. That makes it very hard to believe that continues. I think the support, especially within the president's base, who do not want an interventionist president, to start putting American boots on the ground, not to mention the untold billions that it will cost the taxpayer to put American boots on the ground when you've got rising prices. There's a lot. The political question for the president gets really tough when you've got affordability on the ballot. You're not always spending $1 billion putting troops on the ground in a foreign country that his base absolutely does not want to see happen.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've just got about a minute left here, Matt. We're talking about some pretty controversial stuff that's actually seeing voting action today. Is Donald Trump working the phones Or is Mike Johnson and Tom Emmer are they doing their jobs whipping votes?
Well, look, as we've seen with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, nobody can whip votes on Capitol Hill like President Trump. So we'll see. That's
why some folks are hoping the phones will be ringing. Too.
Well, we'll see what President Trump's doing behind the scenes here. Mm-hmm. But look, the truth is, as we saw in that passage of that One Big Beautiful Bill last year, which was not easy to do, that was a major success. President Trump has an ability, whether it's with voters or with members on Capitol Hill, to mobilize, energize in a way that no one else can. Let's see what he does with next steps here on it.
We shall.
All right. Our political panel today, Adam Hodge, managing partner at Pulpit International, and Bloomberg Politics contributor, and Matt Terrill, managing partner at Firehouse Strategies. Thank you both for joining us here. We're going to have more up ahead, including with Democratic Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, who leads the DCCC. We're going to get into all of these, and we're monitoring that press briefing with J.D. Vance right now. Stick with us for more headlines. This is Bloomberg. Yesterday, quite a few announcements from President Trump moved stocks across the board, including that President Trump is demanding a record $500 billion increase in annual defense spending. We apparently broke that news to the House Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith on this program earlier this hour, but it is clear that the markets were definitely watching it. And to bring in all of that reaction, we're going to have Norah Mulinda, Bloomberg Television's markets correspondent, because Norah, this could be a potential big boost to weapons makers. But at the same time, didn't we hear President Trump threaten some of these companies that could be poised to profit from this?
Absolutely. So you're really seeing the market trying to digest how to feel about this, because you did mention the fact that we got some news that's positive, of course, for the space. When you think about the idea of boosting the budget, of course, to about $1.5 trillion by 2027. But on the other end of the coin, you also have the fact that there's a threat to a lot of the companies that are poised to benefit from this potential boost. So it's interesting as you're trying to see the trade and how people are thinking about this. They're really trying to decipher what this means for the space. Of course, when we think about the United States defense companies in comparison to maybe their international players in Europe, we have been seeing European defense names really outpacing the ones that we have here in the U.S. So people are really just trying to figure out what this means. Will it pass through Congress, and the implications here for the U.S. defense contractors?
So what are we actually seeing here, Norah? And I know this is important because you used to cover the defense space here. That whiplash we saw yesterday. First, it was the announcement on dividends and buybacks. Defense stocks went straight down. Then the president floats a $1.5 trillion defense budget, and they just go to the moon. Was that a short squeeze, or are these new buyers going long because they think there's a windfall ahead?
Well, certainly when you think about the space, what really moves a lot of these stocks is the contracts, the government contracts. That still remains paramount when we think about this industry. So you're going to see any sort of move that indicates an increase to the defense budget that is substantial, or one that is potentially a slash to the budget, really swinging stocks and really buoying them one way or the other, Joe.
Mm-hmm. How about the housing stocks, Norah, that were also moving on the president's rhetoric yesterday? He doesn't want institutional buyers of single-family homes. We even saw some confusion on this. I mean, what's it like to be BlackRock when you're dealing with the negative implications of Blackstone?
Yeah, it's interesting because you start to see a lot of people confusing BlackRock with Blackstone, especially when we think about the major player, the largest U.S. company that's involved in a lot of real estate asset management. That is Blackstone. But we did see the negative implications that came with people who continue to confuse the two companies. But when we think about the companies more broadly, both Blackstone and a lot of the real estate companies that we were keeping an eye on yesterday, Invitation Homes, American Homes for Rent, we are seeing them pairing their declines. We are seeing them in the red right now, but not nearly as far of a decline as we did see yesterday. But of course, people are really just trying to think about the implications for this sector. But it is important to note, as I've been talking to my sources, that a lot of institutional investors only represent about roughly less than 1% of the single family housing stock that we have in the United States. So there is some discussion as to whether or not this is overstated when we think about the risks to this market.
Yeah. Norah, thank you so much. Norah Mulinda with us live from New York, watching Wall Street. And we'll have another check on the markets with Charlie Pellet coming up at 2 p.m. Great opportunity as we look ahead to some important votes today on Capitol Hill, namely one in the House of Representatives, as we've been discussing throughout the program, on potentially reviving the enhanced Obamacare subsidies beyond the cliff that we've already gone over. Congresswoman Suzan DelBene is with us, Democrat from Washington, also chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. It's her job to get Democrats elected and take power in the midterms. And Madam Chairwoman, it's great to have you back, as always, on Bloomberg TV and radio. We want your take on health care, but I have to ask you just quickly about what we were just discussing. President Trump wants to ban institutional buyers of single-family homes, which is something that we tend to hear from the left. Will President Trump spend his second year in office taking a page from the liberal playbook?
Well, let's be clear. Democrats have been fighting for working families. Republicans have been focused on the wealthy and well-connected. We've been fighting to make sure housing more affordable, to help address the cost crisis that American families are feeling with food, health care, child care, energy costs, all going up because of direct actions from this administration. There has been an outcry across the country. If Republicans would listen, they would be hearing that outcry. It's important that we stand up, and that's why this vote today is so important in terms of making sure that people have affordable health care.
Well, let's continue with this vote happening today, a so-called clean 3-year extension on the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies. We spoke to Senator Jeanne Shaheen yesterday, who said that this could be used as a vehicle for the Senate's plan, which would then get kicked back to your chamber. How would you vote if we see that plan materialize, as the reporting indicates? A shorter extension, maybe 2 years, and it would include structural changes like anti-fraud protections and an income cap.
Well, let's be clear. My focus is on the vote that we have today, a 3-year extension, making sure that millions of people have affordable health care right now. Their premiums are up right now. This should have happened a long time ago. Republicans are late to the game, but we are going to keep pushing. This vote today is important because it's because of House Democrats pushing, being united on this issue, that we are getting this vote. And we'll have a piece of legislation to push the Senate to move because the efforts in the past hadn't been going forward. So this is really because of the strength of House Democrats standing up for the American people.
Well, but of course, this probably won't be the bill that becomes law, correct? Should Democrats brace themselves for a negotiation that might bring these two bills together, Congresswoman, or are you simply counting on Republican frontliners to cross the aisle and help you make this happen? You got 9 on board yesterday. How many do you see tonight?
Well, I think folks should understand that this is good policy. This helps families across the country. Republicans created a health care crisis. They did their big ugly bill, slashing Medicaid. It has had impacts across the country and on rural health care, rural hospitals impacted, services being cut. So their refusal to extend the tax credits has only made it worse. So this is an important step forward, and absolutely people, remember, should be voting for legislation to keep these tax credits in place. I think yesterday was an important vote. We have a couple of votes today, the final vote later today, to make sure we extend the tax credits. That is critically important. And then we will tackle how we move forward in the Senate.
But this is exactly what we're outlining here. It's an extension. Of course, you have a key role when it comes to getting Democrats elected. Is there any talk about a more sustainable plan? Are you hearing that from voters out on the campaign trail as we gear up for November? Because this is just basically kicking the can down the road, right? We're going to have another discussion about health care moving forward.
Absolutely we are, and we should be. We should be talking about how we move forward, making sure that people have affordable, quality health care across the country. Instead of moving forward, Republicans have been ripping things apart, moving backward with no plan whatsoever. They don't have any idea what they want to do except take health care away. We need to continue to be looking at what's working, what's not working, and making sure our ongoing goal is affordable, quality health care everywhere in this country. That has been our goal. Republicans just want to repeal with no idea how to go forward. And we're going to continue as we fight for the majority. And when we have the majority, that's our goal. Continue to move us forward to make sure our focus is on affordable, quality health care for the American people. And frankly, affordable cost of living for the American people.
Are you optimistic about government funding, Congresswoman? A lot of folks think that the potential for a shutdown or not might ride on the outcome of this very issue when it comes to ACA premiums. Can you tell our viewers and listeners the government will not shut down at the end of this month?
Well, you know, the way that we make sure that we have funding bills that work is they're bipartisan. And Republicans weren't interested in coming to the table, working with Democrats to move forward bipartisan legislation. I think we're in a path where some bipartisan bills are moving, and that's critically important because as these bills move, they actually create a long-term budget that is important, long-term being for the rest of this fiscal year. But this should have been done before the fiscal year started. It should have been done before October 1st. There's no reason we have to be in this place. It's because Republicans weren't interested in putting together funding. We are very much interested in doing that, and my hope is that as long as we continue on a bipartisan path, we will get bills done.
All right, some cautious optimism there. Sticking with the budget, wanted to also get your response to President Trump calling for an increase in the defense budget. He's asking for $1.5 trillion for the 2027 fiscal year. Is that something that you think has an appetite in the House of Representatives?
Well, I think, first of all, the president owes members of Congress a detailed description of exactly what he thinks he's doing with this money. The power of the purse lies with Congress. Congress should make a decision on how money is appropriated and allocated. I think that's critically important. And so there's much, much more information that folks need to have to understand how that's going to work. Unfortunately, the president has not respected and worked with Congress on funding. That's going to be critically important moving forward.
And it's interesting, the president was talking about defense contractors yesterday as well, and I know your state is no stranger to them as we consider the likes of Boeing and others. Congresswoman, what do you think of this idea of limiting defense contractors' ability to buy back their own shares or deliver dividends to shareholders, knowing that they're making the bulk of their revenue off of taxpayer money? Is that something you'd support?
Well, I think, again, these are topics that we should be discussing in Congress. We should be bringing people in, talking about what we can do to make sure that our focus on taxpayer dollars is they're used to the best interests of the American people. That's our job. Oversight, understanding where dollars are going, and how we maximize the use of taxpayer dollars to benefit the American people. That's what the Congress's role is. That's why we need to have robust hearings and the appropriations process, something that in Mike Johnson's Congress, he's been uninterested in doing, uninterested in bringing folks in, even folks from the administration not willing to come to testify in front of committees and Congress. All of that's critically important so we can talk about the policies that are going to make a difference and talk about the right path to move forward.
Sticking with defense in the final minute we have you, there's movement in the Senate on this war powers resolution. I'm curious what you think the bigger question is for Congress right now. Is it what happened this last weekend in Venezuela, or is it questions about what could happen moving forward?
Well, I think that it's been clear that there is no plan going forward from the administration. Maduro is a violent dictator. There's no disagreement on that. But we need to know what the plan is going forward. What does it mean for the American people? What does it mean for the Venezuelan people? The administration has not provided any answers. We need a full plan. And yes, Congress needs to be part of this process. The administration should be consulting with Congress. I think that's critically important, especially as we continue to hear the president talk about, other places in the world that that he's interested in. That's absolutely, Congress has an important role to play. We are a co-equal branch, and I think it's very important in a bipartisan way that folks speak up.
All right, Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, a Democrat from Washington and chairwoman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Thanks so much for being here with us on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And Joe, you're getting ready to head to Capitol Hill for some special coverage tonight
indeed.
All of these things that we're talking about.
We'll be right where the Congresswoman was standing, starting 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll be here with our great panel, and we're going to have a lot to learn in real time together with the vote on extending Obamacare subsidies, or reviving them, maybe we should say. Much more ahead. We'll check stocks next with Charlie right here on Bloomberg.